The wedding photos were still on Leanne's Instagram. Kara had looked at them recently, not out of nostalgia, but almost as evidence, trying to find the moment. The precise frame where you could see it if you look hard enough. The slight tension in Leanne's smile and the one by the seafront. The way Dom's hand rested on her waist like he wasn't quite sure it was welcome there anymore. But that was now, reading backwards. At the time, everyone had just called it a beautiful day. Leanne and Dom had met at a house party when they were both 24. The story they told at dinner tables and family gatherings had been polished smooth with repetition. Dom had been standing in the kitchen holding a warm beer he didn't want, and Leanne had walked in looking for the fridge, and she'd taken one look at him and said, "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else." And he'd laughed and said, "Genuinely, yes." And that had been it. 8 months later, they were living together. 8 years later, they were married. Kara had liked Dom from the beginning. He was the kind of man who remembered how you took your coffee and actually listened when you were talking, not just waiting for his turn to speak. He was quieter than Leanne. Most people were, but not in a dull way. More in a considered way. He thought before he said things. He read actual books. He was the sort of person who improved a room simply by being calm in it. Leanne was the opposite, and for a long time the opposition had worked. She was the spark, and he was the steady burn. She pulled him out. He grounded her. At family Christmases, at barbecues, at Kara's own birthday dinners, they'd moved around each other with the comfortable ease of two people who had built something real. But somewhere in the last 2 or 3 years, the balance had shifted in a way that was hard to name precisely. It wasn't dramatic. There was no single explosion, no obvious fracture point. It was quieter than that. It was Dom working late more often and Leanne filling the silence with plans he wasn't part of. It was Leanne suggesting holidays Dom couldn't get time off for, then going anyway with friends. It was the two of them sitting on opposite ends of the sofa at Kara's flat one evening, both on their phones, and Kara realizing she couldn't remember the last time she'd seen them have a real conversation. Not logistics, not scheduling, not can you pick up milk, but an actual conversation where they looked at each other. She'd mentioned it once, carefully, to her mom. Her mom had sighed and said, "They're just comfortable. It happens." Kara hadn't pushed it. The smoking had been a point of tension for years. Dom smoked, not heavily, maybe half a packet a day, and Leanne hated it. It had started as gentle nagging, then hardened into real resentment. "You smell like an ashtray. I've asked you 100 times. Do you not care what I think?" Dom would stub out whatever he was smoking and say nothing, which Leanne interpreted as indifference and Dom probably meant as restraint. The cannabis was more recent. A few years back, he'd started smoking in the evenings to wind down after work, and Leanne had made her feelings about that very clear too. It became a wall between them, a symbol of everything she felt he didn't try hard enough to change for her sake. What Leanne didn't say, what Kara suspected but couldn't prove, was that the smoking was never really the point. It was just the thing that was easiest to point at. Because Leanne was restless in a way that had nothing to do with Dom specifically. She'd always been restless. Even as a teenager, she'd been the one pacing the edges of things, looking for the next event, the next plan, the next version of herself. She changed jobs the way other people change hairstyles. She redecorated their flat twice in 3 years. She needed stimulation like other people needed water and the slow, domestic rhythm of a long marriage. The same face across the breakfast table, the same arguments about the same small things, the comfortable and the known, sat on her like a coat that was slightly too small. It didn't make her a bad person. Kara had wrestled with that. Restlessness wasn't a character flaw. Plenty of people felt trapped and found ways to talk about it honestly, to work through it, to grieve the loss of early excitement and build something new with the person they'd chosen. Leanne had never been good at the hard conversations. And so instead of having them, she'd found other outlets. The flirting had always been there, even when she and Dom were first together. Kara had noticed it early and assumed it was just Leanne's personality. She was tactile, warm, magnetic. Men responded to her, and she responded back, and it felt harmless. At her work Christmas party 3 years ago, Kara had watched Leanne talk to a colleague for 40 minutes in a corner, her body angled toward him, laughing at everything he said. Dom had been standing 20 feet away talking to someone else, unbothered, trusting. Kara had felt uneasy, but hadn't been able to say why exactly. Nothing had happened, as far as she knew. The free drinks excuse had become a running joke in the family. "Oh, that's just Leanne. She just does it for the drinks," said lightly, laughed off. A way of not looking directly at something that felt uncomfortable to examine too closely. It was easier not to look. Kara had become expert at not looking. Right up until Harfield. The weekend had been Kara's mom's idea, a girls' trip to reset before spring properly arrived. A rented cottage in Harfield, a small coastal town with a good fish and chip shop and a harbor that looked like a postcard. The four of them, Kara, Leanne, their cousin Bex, and their mom, Margaret. No partners, no obligations, no plans beyond walking and eating and drinking wine in the evenings. Kara had been looking forward to it. She needed the break. Her job had been grinding her down all winter, and she and Bex had been messaging for weeks about nothing in particular in that aimless way that meant they both needed an anchor. Even Leanne had seemed genuinely excited when the booking was confirmed, messaging the family group chat with a string of wave emojis and the cottage's listing photos. They arrived on Friday afternoon to cold February sunshine that made everything look clean and sharp. The cottage was small but warm, flagstone floors, a wood burner, mismatched mugs, the smell of salt and old stone. Margaret immediately found the kettle. Bex immediately found the wine. Leanne stood in the doorway, looking out at the harbor with an expression Kara couldn't quite read. Wistful, maybe, or like someone who'd been holding their breath for a long time and was finally beginning to exhale. That evening, Leanne suggested the anchor. It was a pub at the end of the harbor road, low-ceilinged, loud on a Friday, warm with the collective body heat of locals and a few weekend visitors. They got a table near the window and ordered food and drinks, and for the first hour, it was genuinely lovely. Margaret was funny when she'd had a glass of wine, and Bex had a gift for impressions that had the table crying with laughter. Kara felt the tension she'd been carrying in her shoulders for months begin to loosen. She noticed Leanne's attention drift sometime around 9 o'clock. A group of men had arrived. 5 or 6 of them, mid-30s, the kind of group that had clearly started drinking earlier in the day. They were loud, but not aggressively so, wearing matching t-shirts that marked them out as a birthday group. They took up the long table by the bar. Leanne clocked them within seconds. Not obviously, she didn't turn and stare, but Kara saw the shift. The way her posture changed slightly. The way she laughed just a touch more brightly at something Margaret said, pitched to Carrie. One of the men, tall, broad across the shoulders, dark hair starting to curl at the ears, looked over. He caught Leanne's eye and smiled. She smiled back. Just a smile. Just a fraction of a second. But Kara felt it like a drop in temperature. His name, they would learn later, was Ryan. He came over eventually, around 10, when the pub had filled further and the group by the bar had spilled outward and made any separation artificial. He had an easy smile and a voice pitched low enough that you had to lean in to hear him over the noise. He introduced himself to the table, generally, but his eyes returned to Leanne like a compass finding north. Kara watched her sister transform. It wasn't fake. That was what made it so hard to dismiss. The brightness that came into Leanne's face when Ryan spoke to her was real. The way she leaned forward, elbows on the table, animated and attentive, was the version of Leanne that Kara hadn't seen in years. Not since early on with Dom. Not since before comfort had settled over everything like a fine layer of dust. They talked for over an hour. Kara tried to follow the conversation, but she was also trying to have one with Bex and her mom, and the noise of the pub made it fragmented. She caught pieces. Ryan was there for a friend's birthday. The matching t-shirts made sense now. He lived in Westmore, a city about 3 hours from Harfield. He was funny, self-deprecating in that particular way that men who know they're attractive sometimes are, as though the self-awareness neutralizes the vanity. Leanne was glowing. When they finally left, Margaret had been stifling yawns since 11. Ryan walked them as far as the pub door. He and Leanne stood fractionally apart from the group for a moment. Kara saw her sister tap something into her phone and hand it to him. He typed, handed it back. Their fingers touched briefly in the exchange. Nothing remarkable. The most ordinary thing in the world on the surface. Kara said nothing on the walk back to the cottage. She went to bed and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Saturday was easier. They walked along the coastal path in the morning, the wind sharp enough to make conversation difficult, and ate chips from paper bags sitting on a harbor wall. Leanne was good company, chatty, affectionate, looping her arm through Kara's and talking about nothing of consequence. Kara relaxed, told herself she'd read too much into last night, told herself a number exchange in a pub between two adults was just a number exchange. Then Leanne brought up the anchor at tea time. We should go back tonight. It was really good, wasn't it? Margaret said she'd quite like a quieter evening, maybe a bottle of wine at the cottage. Oh, come on. It's our last night. We can do quiet wine at home anytime. She said it cheerfully, reasonably, in the tone of someone making a perfectly ordinary suggestion. But Kara caught the edge underneath it, the slight pressure, the way Leanne's eyes didn't quite meet hers when she said it. They went back to the anchor. Ryan was there. Looking back, Kara would wonder whether he'd been told to be, whether the number exchange had included a message she hadn't seen, whether the whole thing had been arranged. She'd never know for certain. But Ryan was there, and within 20 minutes of their arrival, he'd pulled his chair up to their table, and within 40 minutes, it was as though the rest of them didn't exist. Leanne and Ryan sat in their own private weather system. They weren't loud about it. That was almost worse. They weren't performing for anyone. They spoke quietly, heads angled toward each other, laughing at things the rest of the table wasn't party to. At one point, Ryan said something low and serious, and Leanne's expression shifted. Something crossed her face that Kara couldn't name. Something between recognition and want. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and looked down at the table for a moment. And when she looked back up, she was smiling in a way that had nothing in it of the woman who'd been married in a coastal hotel in spring. The incident at the bar happened around 10:30. Kara had got up to order another round. The bar was crowded and she was waiting, card in hand, when a man lurched into her from the side, drunk and off balance, heavy enough that she stumbled and grabbed the bar to stop herself from going down. Her elbow caught the edge of something and sent a glass skidding. The man didn't apologize. Kara's heart was hammering. It had been sudden and sharp, and for a moment she felt genuinely shaken. She turned, instinctively, to look for Leanne. Her sister was less than 2 meters away. Leanne was looking at Ryan. She hadn't seen it, hadn't noticed. Kara stood there for a moment with her heart still running fast, waiting for her sister to glance over, to check on her, to register the small collision that had just happened a body's length away. Nothing. Kara turned back to the bar and ordered the drinks herself. The drive home on Sunday was quiet. Leanne slept in the passenger seat most of the way, head against the window, face peaceful. Kara drove and listened to the radio at low volume and tried to think clearly about what she'd seen and what, if anything, it meant. A number exchange. 2 evenings talking to a man. No kissing. No disappearing. Nothing that would constitute evidence of anything if you described it aloud to someone who hadn't been there. And yet, the feeling in her stomach was not subtle. She'd seen enough of Leanne's marriage, up close and from the outside, to know that something had been wrong for a long time. She'd watched Dom try in his quiet, steady way, and she'd watched Leanne pull away in increments so small that each individual one was deniable. The flirting had always been there. The restlessness had always been there. What was new, what Kara couldn't dismiss, was the look on her sister's face when she'd talked to Ryan. Leanne had looked, for the first time in years, like she was exactly where she wanted to be. The text started that same evening. Kara knew because Leanne mentioned it, casually, almost carelessly, dropping it into a phone call 2 days after they got home. Oh, I've been chatting to that guy from Harfield, actually. Ryan. He's really interesting. Kara said, right, and waited. I mean, it's nothing. We're just talking. Does Dom know? A pause. Brief but loaded. There's nothing to know. The conversations with the family started about 10 days later. Not directly at first. Leanne would say things in passing, fragments dropped into otherwise ordinary conversations, and it took Kara a while to understand that Leanne was laying groundwork, building a case, softening the ground. I've been thinking a lot about whether I'm actually happy. Dom and I have just been in different places for a long time. I don't know if I'm in love with him anymore. I think I've been pretending." Margaret had called Kara after one of these conversations, worried and uncertain. She seemed serious. I don't know what to say to her. Kara didn't know either. What she knew, what she couldn't say to her mom yet because she didn't have enough pieces, was that Leanne wasn't grieving a marriage that had failed. She was exiting one, and the exit was already built. Dom, meanwhile, was trying. Leanne had spoken to him, told him she was unhappy, that she felt disconnected, that something needed to change. She'd apparently been honest enough to scare him, because Dom had responded with everything he had. He'd quit smoking within a week. Both the cigarettes and the cannabis, cold, apparently, without ceremony. He'd booked a restaurant they'd been talking about going to for 2 years. He'd suggested a weekend away, just the two of them, somewhere they hadn't been. Kara had heard all of this through her mom, because Dom had rung Margaret to ask, awkwardly and with evident distress, whether she thought Leanne was okay, whether he was doing enough. He'd said, "I just want her to tell me what she needs and I'll do it." Kara had sat with that for a long time. He was quitting smoking. He was booking restaurants. He was calling his mother-in-law at 9 in the evening because he was frightened and trying and completely in the dark. And the thing he didn't know, the thing no one had told him, was that Leanne's phone was full of messages from a man she'd met in a coastal pub 6 weeks ago, and those messages had not stopped, not slowed, not become anything that could be passed off as casual. Bex was the one who finally said it directly. Bex and Leanne had always been close. Close enough that Leanne apparently forgot, sometimes to filter herself. They'd had a long phone call, and afterwards Bex had rung Kara and said, flatly, "It's not friendship, Kara." She's told him things she hasn't told Dom. She's made plans. What kind of plans? A pause. She's coming to visit you in a few weeks. Ryan lives in Westmore. Kara sat down slowly on her kitchen chair. She told you that. Not in so many words. But yeah, she's not hiding it very carefully from people she thinks are on her side. The 3 days after Bex's phone call were the worst. Kara went through the motions of her ordinary life. Work, food shopping, an evening run, a few episodes of something she couldn't have summarized, while carrying a weight in her chest that she couldn't put down. It wasn't just about Leanne and Dom. It was about her own position in the middle of it. The things she knew and the things she didn't know how to act on. She thought about Dom constantly. Not obsessively. She didn't know him well enough for that. But with a dull, persistent ache of something that wasn't quite guilt, but was adjacent to it. The guilt of the witness. The guilt of knowing. He'd been in her mom's kitchen at Christmas, washing up without being asked, talking about a book he'd been reading. He was the kind of man who washed up at his in-laws without being asked. And now he was at home, making sacrifices for a marriage that had already been quietly vacated. She thought about what she would want, if the positions were reversed, if she were the one in the dark, if someone had information that would shatter her world, but also, finally, make sense of the strange, cold distance she'd been living in. Would she want to know? She thought yes. She thought almost certainly yes. But she also thought about Leanne. They had fought before, as sisters do, properly, badly, with things said that took weeks to unsay. But they had always come back. There had never been a rupture that felt permanent. What Kara was considering now had the shape of something that couldn't be taken back. If she went to Dom, Leanne would not forgive her. She was certain of that. Leanne's anger was nuclear in scale and long in duration. And she would experience the act of telling Dom not as honesty or protection, but as betrayal of the most fundamental kind. She would not speak to Kara for months, maybe longer. She would tell the family story in a way that positioned Kara as the villain. That was the calculation. Kara turned it over and over in the sleepless early hours, looking at it from different angles, trying to find an angle that made it simple. There wasn't one. What shifted the balance eventually was the visit. Because if Leanne came to Kara's flat, stayed in the spare room, used her shower, ate her food, watched her television, while using that visit as cover to see Ryan, then the situation changed. Then Kara would be a participant. Her address would be the alibi. Her invitation would be the mechanism. She would be complicit not by silence, but by provision. She couldn't do it. She rang her mom. Then she rang Bex. They talked for a long time, threading through every option and consequence. And by the end of it, Kara knew what she was going to do, and she knew it was the right thing, and she knew it was going to hurt. She opened a new message to Leanne. She typed slowly, reading each sentence back twice. Hey, I'm not stupid. I know Ryan lives in Westmore. I won't have you come and stay if you're planning to see him. I won't be your cover story. If you want to visit me, you end things with Ryan first. What you're doing to Dom isn't fair, and it's not okay. End it with Ryan or end things properly with Dom, but stop doing this in the dark. I've got photos from Harfield. Don't make me use them. She read it a final time. Her thumb hovered. She put the phone down on the kitchen table and went to bed. Tomorrow. She'd send it tomorrow. She lay in the dark and tried to sleep and failed completely. The flat was quiet in the particular way of late-night cities, not silent, but settled into its own rhythms, distant traffic and the occasional voice from the street below. Kara lay on her back with her eyes open and thought about Leanne at 19, dancing in someone's kitchen to a song they both still associated with that summer. She thought about Leanne at 26 calling her at midnight to say she thought Dom might propose, and she didn't know how she felt about it, and they'd talk for 2 hours until Leanne knew exactly how she felt about it. She thought about Leanne in the pub at Harfield, face tipped toward Ryan like a plant finding a window. She thought about Dom ringing their mom. The specific anguish of that, going to your wife's mother for reassurance. The vulnerability of it. I just want her to tell me what she needs, and I'll do it. He was doing everything she'd asked, and Leanne was texting Ryan from the same house. Kara understood, in an abstract way, how these things happened. She'd read enough and lived enough to know that people didn't choose to feel disconnected from their marriages, that loneliness within a relationship was real and painful, that attraction arrived without invitation and didn't come with a clean way to decline. She could hold all of that. Leanne's restlessness, the slow erosion of something that had once worked, the electricity of whatever was happening with Ryan, and still understand it as human. Flawed and human. But understanding it didn't make it acceptable. And there was something else that had been growing quietly in the back of Kara's mind, something she hadn't said to her mom or to Bex because it felt small and selfish alongside everything else. At the bar in the Anchor on the Saturday night, the man colliding into her, her hand grabbing the bar top, her heart hammering, turning to look for her sister, instinctively, the way you turn towards someone you trust to have your back. And Leanne, less than 2 meters away, looking at Ryan. Not every betrayal was a dramatic one. Some of them were small enough that you could almost miss them. A moment when someone who was supposed to see you simply didn't, because they were looking somewhere else entirely. Kara thought about that for a long time. Then she thought about the message on her phone. The words she'd chosen carefully, the ultimatum she didn't want to deliver, but had to. She thought about what happened after she sent it. The conversation it would trigger, the anger that would come back at her, the possible unraveling of something that had been building for months regardless of what she did or didn't do. She thought about whether Leanne would actually end things with Ryan, or end things with Dom, or would simply be furious and regroup and find a different way to cover her tracks. She didn't know. She genuinely didn't know. What she knew was that she couldn't be the cover story. She couldn't let Dom continue in the dark because it was easier for everyone else. She couldn't look at herself clearly if she did. Outside, a car went past. The digital clock on the bedside table said 3:14 a.m. Tomorrow. She closed her eyes. She breathed. She told herself the decision was already made, and made decisions didn't need re-examining at 3 in the morning, and that what she needed now was sleep. Her mind, of course, disagreed. She lay there until sometime after 4, when exhaustion finally overrode everything and pulled her under. Her last coherent thought was not of Leanne, not of Ryan, not of Dom. It was of the 4 of them walking the coastal path on Saturday morning, chips from paper bags, the wind so sharp it made thought impossible, and how she'd felt, just for that hour, like everything was fine. Like the weekend was exactly what it was supposed to be. She held on to that for a moment. Then it dissolved. Morning would come soon enough. The message would be sent, and whatever happened next, she would have to live with the consequences of being the one who told the truth.